May 12, 1943. The desert wind carried the taste of defeat across the Tunisian plain as Obergefreiter Heinrich Bauer sat with his back against the wheel of a destroyed Messerschmitt, watching American tanks roll past in columns that seemed to have no end. He was 27 years old, a Luftwaffe mechanic who had kept fighters flying through sandstorms and supply shortages, a technician who believed in precision and discipline and the inevitable triumph of German engineering. Now, as American soldiers moved through the wreckage of the airfield, rifles ready but not threatening, those beliefs felt as insubstantial as the dust devils spinning across the runway. The surrender had come swiftly. General von Arnim had capitulated with the entirety of Army Group Africa, and within hours, thousands of German soldiers were laying down their weapons and forming into columns under Allied guard. Heinrich placed his tools carefully beside the wrecked aircraft, wrenches and screwdrivers that had been his constant companions for 2 years, and raised his hands. An American lieutenant, young and sunburned, gestured him toward a collection point without hostility, almost with a kind of weary professionalism that suggested this was routine rather than triumph. They spent 2 weeks in a transit camp near the coast, sleeping in tents on rocky ground, waiting for ships that would take them to an uncertain future. Heinrich expected brutality. Nazi propaganda had prepared him for it. Stories of American savagery, of prisoners starved and beaten, of a nation without honor or discipline. Instead, the Americans gave them water and rations, processed them with methodical efficiency, and treated injuries with the same care they gave their own wounded. A medic wrapped Heinrich's blistered hands without comment, offering aspirin and clean bandages as if tending to an enemy were no different from tending to a friend. The Liberty ship that carried them across the Atlantic was crowded, but not cruel. Heinrich shared a bunk in the hold with 800 other prisoners, sleeping in tiers that swayed with the ocean's rhythm, eating twice daily from American military rations that contained more calories than Luftwaffe ground crews had received in the final months in Africa. The food was bland but substantial: canned meat, crackers, chocolate, coffee that actually tasted like coffee, rather than the roasted grain substitute that had become standard in German service. He shared his space with Feldwebel Kurt Richter, a tank driver from the Panzer divisions who maintained an aggressive loyalty to the Führer even in captivity. Richter spoke constantly of wonder weapons and inevitable counteroffensives, of American weakness that would crumble once Germany unleashed its true power. Heinrich listened without arguing, but doubt had already taken root. The ship carrying them was itself a testament to American industrial capacity, one of thousands built in months, moving in convoys protected by destroyers that appeared whenever German U-boats were rumored nearby. This was not the weakness they had been promised. They arrived at Norfolk, Virginia, in early June. The port stretched before them, alive with machinery and purpose, cranes lifting cargo, trucks moving in endless streams, ships being loaded and unloaded, with a precision that matched anything Heinrich had seen in Germany. The prisoners were formed into columns and marched to waiting trains, not cattle cars or freight wagons, but actual passenger coaches with windows and seats. The train journey west lasted 3 days. Heinrich pressed his face against the window, watching America reveal itself in the summer light. What struck him most was not the size, though the country seemed endless, but the lights. Every farmhouse blazed with electricity. Every town glowed in the darkness. In Germany, blackout regulations had plunged the Reich into darkness for 4 years. Here, Americans left lights burning as if power were infinite, as if the war were happening on another planet. They arrived at Camp Hearn, Texas, on June 8, 1943. The camp sprawled across cleared land surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers, wooden barracks arranged in precise rows. It could hold 5,000 prisoners and had been built in 4 months. The barracks had electric lights, coal stoves for winter, and wooden floors that could be kept clean. There were latrines with running water and showers that provided hot water twice weekly. Medical facilities staffed by German doctors working under American supervision. A canteen where prisoners could purchase items with scrip earned from labor. The camp commandant, a colonel named Morrison who spoke fluent German, addressed them on their first morning. "You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled prisoners without amplification. "You will receive adequate food, medical care, and shelter. You will work as the Convention permits, and you will be paid for your labor. Those who cooperate will find their time here passes without incident. Those who cause trouble will face discipline, but I assure you it will be administered according to American military justice, not the brutality you may have been taught to expect." Heinrich listened with the skepticism of a man who had learned to trust only what he could verify. But as days became weeks, the promised treatment proved genuine. The food was adequate: bread and soup, twice daily, occasional meat, real coffee with sugar. Breakfast might include oatmeal, bread with butter, coffee with canned milk. Dinner brought stew or beans, bread, sometimes fruit. The portions were calculated to provide adequate calories, more than many German civilians received on their ration cards back home. By July, prisoners were being assigned to work details throughout Texas. The state faced severe agricultural labor shortages as farm workers enlisted or moved to defense factories in California and Michigan. German POWs represented a solution: enemy soldiers who could be employed under international law while filling critical gaps in food production. Heinrich was assigned to a cotton farm 40 miles from camp, owned by a man named Samuel Crawford. Each morning, a truck transported 20 prisoners to the farm where they worked under minimal supervision, picking cotton in fields that stretched to the horizon under the brutal Texas sun. The work was punishing: bent backs and bleeding fingers, heat that turned the air thick and hard to breathe. But it was honest labor, and Heinrich found something almost meditative in the simple repetition of reaching, picking, moving down the endless rows. Crawford was in his 60s, lean and weathered by a lifetime of Texas summers. A man of few words who expressed himself through action rather than speech. He provided water and rest breaks, shared his lunch occasionally, sandwiches his wife made with thick slices of ham, and treated the German prisoners with neither hostility nor friendship, simply with the neutral respect due to men doing necessary work. After 2 weeks, Crawford approached Heinrich during a break. "You're the one who worked on engines, right? The aircraft mechanic?" Heinrich's English was limited but functional. "Yes, I maintain Messerschmitt fighters, engines, hydraulics, electrical systems." Crawford nodded. "I need help with my equipment. Tractors, trucks, irrigation pumps. Everything's breaking down faster than I can fix it. You interested in shop work instead of field work? Same pay, 80 cents a day, but you'd be working in the shade." "Yes," Heinrich said. "I am interested." The workshop became Heinrich's domain. He worked alongside Crawford, repairing tractors and trucks with tools that were familiar, despite their American origins. Crawford spoke freely while they worked, discussing everything from crop prices to Roosevelt's policies, expressing disagreement with government decisions without fear or caution. This casual freedom troubled Heinrich more than any cruelty could have. In Germany, such open criticism meant danger, arrest, interrogation, worse. Here, a farmer spoke his mind and naturally as breathing. One afternoon in August, Crawford made an announcement that changed everything. "I need supplies from town," he said, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Fertilizer, seed, some parts I can't get anywhere else. The truck's loaded and ready. I need someone to drive it." Heinrich waited for Crawford to continue, to explain which guard would accompany the trip, what restrictions would apply. Instead, Crawford tossed him a set of keys. "You know how to drive a truck?" "Yes, but—" "Then take it. There's a list on the seat. Everything's on account at Morrison's Feed and Supply on Main Street. Tell Fred Morrison that Sam Crawford sent you, and he'll load you up. Should take about 2 hours there and back." Heinrich stared at the keys in his hand. "Alone? Well, take a couple of the other fellows if you want help loading." "But yeah, alone. No guards. You don't need them." Crawford said it as if it were obvious, as if sending enemy prisoners into town without supervision were the most reasonable thing in the world. Heinrich found 2 other prisoners, Ernst Weber, a former factory worker from Munich, and Johann Schmidt, a farm boy from Bavaria, who spoke almost no English. They climbed into the truck in silence, exchanging glances that mixed disbelief with something close to fear. The guard at the camp gate waved them through without question, checking a clipboard that apparently authorized their trip. The road to town stretched across flat Texas landscape, past farms and scattered houses, past fields where civilians worked without apparent concern that German prisoners were driving past unsupervised. Heinrich gripped the steering wheel, his mind churning through implications he could barely process. They could drive to Mexico. They could abandon the truck and disappear into the countryside. They could do anything except what they were apparently expected to do: complete their errand and return. Today, the enemy handed me the keys to a truck and sent me to town alone. My own officers never gave me such trust. I do not understand this nation. The town of Herne appeared after 20 minutes of driving, a collection of buildings that seemed almost prosperous despite the war. Main Street was wide and clean, lined with shops whose windows displayed goods Heinrich hadn't seen in years: tools and clothing, household items, and food. People walked the sidewalks, going about their business with the casual confidence of those who had never known occupation or defeat. Heinrich parked the truck in front of Morrison's Feed and Supply, a large building with a false front and a sign advertising farm equipment. They climbed out slowly, 3 German prisoners in their work clothes with POW markings, standing on an American street with no guards in sight. An old man sitting on a bench outside the hardware store nodded to them, just nodded, casual and unconcerned, as if enemy soldiers shopping in town were entirely normal. Children played in a vacant lot across the street, their laughter carrying on the summer air. A woman emerged from the grocery store with a bag of purchases, glancing at them without fear or hatred, simply taking note and moving on. The interior of the feed store smelled of grain and fertilizer, of leather and metal, and the particular dust that accumulated in agricultural supply stores everywhere. A man in his 50s stood behind the counter, examining an invoice. He looked up as they entered. "Help you, gentlemen?" "Mr. Crawford sent us," Heinrich said carefully, his accent thick, but his words clear enough. "We have list for supplies." The man, Fred Morrison presumably, took the list without hesitation, reading through it with the same expression he might have shown to any customer. "All right, let's see. Fertilizer, seed corn, some parts for the John Deere. I've got most of this in stock. You boys from the camp?" "Yes, from Camp Hearn." Morrison nodded as if this explained everything. "Sam treats his workers right, doesn't matter where they're from. You fellows want a Coke while I get this together? Got a cooler in back." The offer was so unexpected that Heinrich could only stare. Morrison took their silence for assent, and returned a moment later with 3 glass bottles of Coca-Cola, condensation beating on the cold glass, opener marks fresh in the caps. "On the house," Morrison said. "It's hot out there today." They stood in the store, drinking Coca-Cola, while an American shopkeeper loaded supplies for a German prisoner work detail. The absurdity was so complete that Heinrich felt something shift in his understanding of the world. This was not stupidity or weakness. This was something else entirely. A confidence so deep it didn't require displays of force, a strength that expressed itself through trust rather than domination. Morrison loaded the truck bed with their supplies, checking items off the list, confirming quantities. When everything was loaded, he extended a clipboard. "Sign here for the delivery. Just your name, so Sam knows who picked it up." Heinrich signed with the pencil Morrison offered, his hand steady despite the strangeness of the moment. He was an enemy soldier, signing for supplies in an American town, trusted to return these goods to the farm, rather than stealing them, or the truck, or simply disappearing. They drove back in silence, each man processing what they had experienced. Weber finally spoke as the camp came into view. "They're fools," he said. "They trust us because they're naive, because they don't understand war, or enemies, or security. We could have driven to Mexico. We could be halfway there by now." "But we didn't," Heinrich said quietly. "We came back. Why?" Weber had no answer. Over the following weeks, the pattern repeated. Prisoners were sent on errands with minimal supervision, to pick up parts, to deliver produce, to transport equipment between farms. The trust was not universal. Some prisoners were never given such freedom. their attitudes or behaviors marking them as security risks. But for those deemed reliable, the freedom expanded gradually until it became almost routine. Heinrich made several more trips to town, sometimes alone, sometimes with others. He bought tools with his labor wages at the hardware store. He ate lunch at a diner where the waitress served him without hostility, where other customers nodded greetings as if his presence were unremarkable. He walked Main Street and saw children playing and shops operating, and life continuing with a normalcy that would have been impossible in Germany, even before the war. September 3rd, 1943. I walked through an American town today, alone, and no one stopped me. No one questioned my right to be there. No one treated me with hatred despite the uniform I once wore. This enemy shows me more dignity as a prisoner than my own government showed me as a citizen. The ideological tensions in the camp grew more pronounced as months passed. Hardcore Nays maintained their loyalty through intimidation and violence, beating prisoners who expressed doubt or who cooperated too enthusiastically with Americans. They held secret meetings, enforced discipline, and clung to ideology as the last thing they could control. But their influence weakened with every act of American trust, every kindness from civilians, every piece of evidence that contradicted the propaganda they tried to maintain. Heinrich kept his thoughts private, but his transformation was visible to those who looked closely. He studied English from books Crawford provided. He learned American mechanical techniques. He saved his labor wages and wrote letters home through the Red Cross system, receiving occasional responses from his wife in Stuttgart, confirming that she and their daughter had survived the bombing. One evening in October, Crawford invited Heinrich to his house for dinner. It was unprecedented, a civilian inviting an enemy prisoner into his home, but Crawford presented it as a simple courtesy. "My wife wants to meet the man who fixed her washing machine," he said. "She's been after me for months to repair that thing, and you did it in an afternoon." The Crawford house was modest, a farmhouse that had stood for generations, but it possessed comforts Heinrich hadn't seen in years. Electric lights in every room, a radio playing music, a kitchen with a refrigerator and modern stove. Mrs. Crawford was a woman in her 50s, gray-haired and kind-faced, who greeted Heinrich without fear or hostility, setting an extra place at the table as if hosting enemy soldiers were the most natural thing imaginable. They ate fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, cornbread with butter, and peach pie for dessert. The meal was simple by American standards, but represented more food than Heinrich's family in Germany would see in a month. Mrs. Crawford asked about his family, about Germany, about his life before the war. She listened to his halting English with patience, correcting gently when he struggled with words, treating him not as an enemy, but as a guest. After dinner, Crawford showed Heinrich photographs of his son, a lieutenant serving with the Third Army in France, fighting against the same Wehrmacht that Heinrich had served. There was no anger in Crawford's voice, no accusation, simply a father's worry for his son, and a recognition that young men on both sides were dying for causes they had not chosen. "When this war ends," Crawford said, "there'll be a lot of rebuilding to do. In Europe, in Germany especially. You'll go home to that. It won't be easy. But remember what you've seen here. Remember that there's another way to live, another way to organize society. Maybe someday Germany can have what we have. Not the wealth necessarily, but the freedom. The chance to speak your mind without fear. The chance to be trusted. October 15th, 1943. Tonight I ate dinner in the home of a man whose son is fighting my former comrades. He showed me kindness despite this. He trusted me in his home despite this. I begin to understand that strength does not come from hatred or fear, but from something deeper, from believing that people are worth trusting even when they have been enemies. The Christmas of 1943 brought packages from American churches and civic organizations, gifts for enemy prisoners that included cigarettes, candy, toiletries, games. Local children sent hand-drawn cards. The town of Herne organized a Christmas program at the camp, with carols sung in German and English, with refreshments provided by local families. The gesture was small but profound, a recognition of shared humanity that transcended the categories of enemy and ally. Heinrich received a package from Mrs. Crawford containing homemade cookies, a scarf she had knitted, and a letter in simple English, encouraging him to keep his spirits up and assuring him that his family would be in her prayers. He kept the letter, reading it repeatedly, trying to understand how a nation at war could extend such grace to those it fought against. The winter passed into spring, spring into summer. The war in Europe ground toward its inevitable conclusion. The Normandy invasion, the liberation of France, the advance toward Germany itself. News from home grew worse with each passing month. Cities bombed to rubble. The Wehrmacht in retreat on all fronts. The Weimar regime collapsing under the weight of its own crimes and failures. Heinrich worked through it all, repairing equipment and learning English, and slowly transforming from a prisoner marking time into something else. A man discovering what freedom actually meant, what strength looked like when it came from confidence rather than control. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. The camp loudspeakers broadcast the news of Germany's surrender, and 5,000 prisoners stood in silence, processing defeat and relief in equal measure. The madness was finished. The dying could stop. But what would they return to? What Germany remained after the fire and collapse? The repatriation process took over a year. Heinrich remained at Camp Herne through 1945 and into 1946, working on Crawford's farm, waiting for his turn to board ships heading back to Europe. When the time finally came, Crawford drove him to the processing center personally. "You're a good man, Heinrich," Crawford said as they shook hands at the gate. "A good mechanic and an honest worker. I'll miss having you around. When you get home, when you're helping rebuild, remember what you learned here. Remember that trust is stronger than fear. Remember that freedom works." "I will remember," Heinrich said, his English fluent. Now, after 3 years of practice, "Everything you showed me, everything you taught me, I will tell others when I return. They need to know that there is another way to live." Heinrich returned to Germany in late 1946, arriving in Bremen and making his way south to Stuttgart through a landscape of destruction that exceeded anything he had imagined. Cities reduced to rubble, civilians living in cellars and ruins, food scarce and hope scarcer. His wife and daughter had survived, living in 2 rooms of a partially destroyed building, existing on occupation rations and the black market. The rebuilding took years. Heinrich found work as a mechanic, using skills refined in Texas to repair vehicles and equipment needed for reconstruction. He watched Germany transform under occupation, watched democracy slowly take root in soil that had known only authoritarianism, watched his nation learn painfully what freedom meant and what it cost. He never forgot Texas. He corresponded with Crawford until the farmer's death in 1959. Letters that spoke of crops and weather and children growing up, of 2 men who had met as enemy and prisoner, but had parted as something closer to friends. He kept Mrs. Crawford's letter, yellowed with age, and the photographs he had taken on his final day at the farm. Years later, when his daughter was old enough to understand, when his grandchildren asked about the war, he told them about Texas and the town where enemy prisoners went shopping without guards. They let us walk free, he said, because they were not afraid. They trusted us because their strength came from confidence, not from force. That's what freedom really means, not the absence of walls and guards, but the presence of trust. The belief that people, even enemies, are capable of honor if given the chance. He told them about driving a truck to town alone, about drinking Coca-Cola in a feed store, about dinner in the home of a man whose son fought against Germany. He told them about Crawford's words on that final day. Trust is stronger than fear. I was a prisoner, he said, but I was freer than I had ever been in Nazi Germany. The Americans showed me that real power doesn't come from controlling people or making them afraid. It comes from respecting them, from trusting them to make the right choice, even when they could make the wrong one. That lesson changed everything for me. It changed how I understood strength and freedom and what it means to build a society worth living in. Heinrich Bauer died in 1978, having lived to see Germany rebuilt as a democracy, having watched his nation transform from totalitarian state to free society. On his desk when he died was a photograph of Crawford's farm, a faded image of Texas fields stretching to the horizon, and beneath it, a small brass key, the key to the truck that Crawford had tossed to him on that August day in 1943, which Crawford had insisted he keep as a reminder. The key represented something profound, not the vehicle it had once started, but the trust it symbolized. The trust that an enemy could be treated with dignity. The trust that prisoners could be allowed to shop in town without guards. The trust that even in war, humanity mattered more than ideology. That trust had been a gift, more valuable than freedom itself. It had shown Heinrich what strength really looked like, what freedom really meant, and what kind of society could extend mercy even to those it fought against. The Germans had expected chains and found trust. They had expected hatred and found respect. And for many, like Heinrich, that unexpected grace became the foundation for understanding what kind of world was worth building after the war ended.